In this video, we are going to be repairing a Cameleon 3 central locking disc. Now, before you watch this video, you need to decide whether this is something you want to do. Sometimes I do this, but you can actually buy these discs on Shapeways. Bugaboo Repair Guy produces these on Shapeways, 3D printed. You can even buy them in stainless steel on Shapeways. So if you don't want to spend a lot of time and do something that is quite intensive, labor intensive and technical, then you might want to consider buying them ahead. However, if you are a masochist or are short on time or money and are just the type of person who wants to produce one of these discs themselves, repair their disc, then we're going to show you how we do it, what I feel is the best way of doing this. Now, I've seen some people on YouTube use screws for this, and I have tried that method and I've never made it work properly. Part of the reason for that is that the head of the screw will eventually need to sit down in the bottom, and if it raises over the lip just a little bit, you won't get the mechanism to work entirely at the end. The other reason for that is that when you use a screw, it's pyramidal, and when it's pyramidal, it doesn't hold the disc nice and tight and flat. So what I use when I'm repairing this is I specially cut rivets to make little plugs, and I drill out holes, and then I use super glue in order to hold them in place within the disc. And I find that this works quite nicely. It tends not to break as opposed to the original plastic discs. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So if you're with me, then what we're going to do first is drill out holes for the plugs to go through. If you look at these arms, the rest of the pegs from the plastic disc is there, so we're going to pop them out. And when you're looking at your rivets, when you're trying to decide on your rivet size, it needs to be something that's going to slide nicely in and can also move. And these rivets don't have sizes written on them, so I can't tell you what that is. But usually when you buy a rivet gun, it comes with a variety of different sizes. And what we're looking for now is width, because we're going to slice off the extra bit of the rivet. Now, these rivet plugs are also going to need to go through the disc right where the pegs have broken off, and that means you're going to need to drill holes. So you're going to want a drill bit that is really close to the size of this rivet, preferably without being larger, preferably just slightly smaller. But if it's too tight of a fit and you try to bang the rivet through, you can crack the disc. So it needs to be more or less an approximation of the rivet. And what I'm going to do is to start with a drill bit that is actually slightly smaller, and then I'm going to widen the holes so I can get as tight a fit as possible. So, okay, we're now going to drill out those holes then for the plugs. You're going to want to use a pair of safety goggles, especially when you get to the dremeling part of this. I once got a piece of plastic in my eyeball and I had to go to the doctor to get it taken out because I was lazy about finding my goggles. So don't make that mistake. You want to take your drill bit and put it right in the center of this hole. And just drill it right through. And again, because I used a drill bit that was a bit smaller, it's too tight, and so we're going to have to now sand around this hole. And I do this in this way because I want it to be as tight as possible in the end. So I'm going to now switch over to a Dremel. Okay. Check again. Still a bit tight. This side now fits, and that side fits even better. So, okay, I'll set this aside for now, and now we are going to start cutting down these rivets to the appropriate size. And I'm going to start with this lip here. So now the deal with this lip, if you look at the inside of your disc, this lip on my rivet is going to go a bit over the sides. So on one side I'm going to have to cut it flat, cut it down on that side and that side of the lip, while on the other I have to cut on 3 sides, because the third side connects with this little bump and hole which connects to the wire inside the central locking mechanism. So one side is going to be, one of these rivets is going to be flattened on 2 sides, and one is going to be flattened on 3 sides. If you have trouble where the end of the rivet is sliding down the shaft, we'll eventually drip some glue in there which will hold the outside of the rivet to the inside a bit better, so you don't have to worry so much about that. I'm going to use a pair of pliers, and we're going to have to put a cutting disc attachment into the Dremel. And you might go through several cutting discs, in which case you're going to want to have a stack of them available. Okay. That's one of them. We're going to set it aside and work on the other before we test it, because the metal heats up a lot and you have to cool it down, and you don't want to widen the holes in the disc by putting hot metal in them. That's something you want to be aware of during the whole process. Okay, you want to leave as much of the lip as you can get away with, so it's best if you do this in stages, because that lip is of course what's going to hold the plug into the disc via superglue, as well as a bit around the shaft. So you want to do it in stages, not do too much. I'm going to go back to this first one, which is now cooled down a bit. It's a little hot. In the end, you're also going to have to sand down a bit where the metal has kind of pushed up over the lips in the sanding process. So here's one of them. I'm going to slide it through and see. There, you can see it's been flattened out on those sides, and it now fits inside there. Okay. And then that one's a bit cooler. This one is the one where I have done it on 3 sides, and this one also now fits inside. If you've made this hole a little bit too wide, not way too wide, but a little too wide, you know, a lot of super glue and a lot of patience, maybe some plastic shavings and so on will eventually hold it tightly as well. Okay, so now I have both of these, and in order to do the next stage of the process, I'm going to sand very carefully down a little bit here around the hole, because there is the plastic is a bit raised up, both because Bugaboo put some imprints on it, and also because during the sanding process, or the drilling process of making the hole, it created a little bit of a plastic lip, and I want as flat an area there as possible. So I'm again going to switch heads on the Dremel, and then I'm going to sand that down. Okay, I have a smaller, somewhat rounded Dremel head now, and we're just going to flatten out that inside. Okay, and now we're going to measure and cut the length of the plug. So we're still leaving this pin on, that'll be removed later. I'm going to put the cutting disc back on my Dremel to make a mark first, and then eventually to cut it. And then I'm going to take one of my pieces here, and I'm going to slide the plug in. Let me just get my safety goggles on. And this you want to hold in kind of flat, and then put this piece on. And then I'm just going to holding this in tight, I'm just going to make a little mark here. Okay, so now I know the height of this disc, but I'm going to actually take it just a little bit down. Don't take it too much down, but I'm going to take it a little bit down because it's easier to do that now, so that it doesn't pop up. This thing needs to fit very flush, both at the top of this part and under the disc. So, just slightly under that line. Okay, I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to do the other one now while that one cools down. Take it in, make it flush. And we'll make our cutting mark. Okay, gonna cut it off now then. You want to use a pair of pliers for this part, and again go a little bit under the mark that you've made. Not much. You can really kind of start on the mark, and then just as you cut through, don't be worried that it's sanding it down a little extra. have to switch cutting discs on my Dremel. I'll be right back. Okay. Now we have both. We can go back to the first. What you find when you cut it is that it creates kind of a lip here, and you're going to need to sand that down because this is no longer going to fit through this part so well. See? A little bit. I guess it wasn't so bad. But in the end, you are going to want to sand down this edge a bit, so we might as well do that now. Switching heads yet again. And I'm just going to buffet both of those heads. Buff both those heads a bit. You're really just trying to get that extra little like metal lip that comes from cutting it off and get it just slightly angled, flatten the top a bit. But you don't want to do it too much. We want these to fit nice and tightly into these L shapes. Okay, now we're going to test it. It's important to get all the pieces correct before you start assembling the thing with glue, because if you have to sand down metal afterwards, you're going to heat up the glue connection and weaken it. So I'm going to hold this tight in and put this in. And you can see it's nice. Look, it comes very close to the top without going over the top. Okay. Test the other one. That one pops out just a little bit, so I'm going to sand that edge down just a touch. There we go. Also very close to the top, but not protruding over. Okay. Last stage of producing these plugs, more or less, is then to slice off this bit. And when you hold the bottom end of the plug with the pliers, you're also, of course, going to do a little bit of damage to the metal, and so that will have to be sanded at the end. We're just going to put this on top, and we're going to need our cutting wheel again. You saw that after I cut it, I just ran the flat part of the cutting wheel over the top so that there's no sharp edges. I'm going to do the other one. Okay, now comes first bit of gluing into this process, and that is that now you have this this rivet that has this extra little metal piece through, and we want that there. So you want to push in from both sides, make sure it's aligned correctly still. And we're going to drip a bit of glue down into that channel in the center of the rivet in order to hold that piece in place. And if you have, sometimes you get unlucky with rivets, and that might have been you, and you've been having trouble with that central pin of the rivet the whole time. But usually I find that it's okay just to glue it at this stage of the process. You might have to glue a bit throughout as you're doing the other parts that we've already covered. I just want to put a bit of glue, and then it's just gonna run down. I'm actually gonna slip this piece here right into the same pair of pliers. I don't want these to stand upright while the glue works its way downwards. And then I'm just going to set it down like this so that they stay upright, and I'm going to leave it for a while, maybe 15-20 minutes. You'll find that with all the stuff you're super gluing with this process, it takes a long time. Once we start gluing the pegs in, we're talking hours before you should do anything more with it. So in this case, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that, and then we'll come back. Okay, now these have sat for a good 20-25 minutes, and the pin inside has glued nice and tight. If you want to be anal about it, you could flip it over and do the other side as well. But there's not really going to be any more sanding on these metal pieces, so most likely the glue will hold fine. And now we get to the first major stage of gluing, the kind where you're going to wait several hours. So we are going to now start gluing these pegs in, and we've already sanded down the inside there, right? So you're going to want to put a generous dose of glue here, and you're going to want to get it over the edge and also into that hole. And then we're going to slide the pegs in. I'm going to need this one for this side because it has only the 2 sanded edges. Slide it right through. Press it in tight against the bottom. Nice and tight. Flip it over. Now if your hole is a bit wide, this might sit at an angle. And you're going to want to try to get it as straight as you possibly can. And to test, you can put this on and rotate it, and see that the L sits flat, both on one side and the other. Okay, pressing that in tight. We're going to move over and do the other side. Check it here as well. You want to get this thing to sit very straight. If your holes are a bit wide, that could be a little bit problematic. Okay, once you have the pegs where you want them to be, you then need to set it down to dry. You just want something flat where you can have those pegs hang down. And then I'm actually just gonna squirt a little more glue around the edges because I know I'm gonna leave this for several hours anyway. Not horribly much, but a bit. Maybe you can get a little bit more surface area contact coverage, like on the sides of those lips. Okay, now we're gonna leave it, and we're gonna leave it for maybe 4 hours, 3-4 hours, something like this. You want it really good and dry before you flip it over and do glue on the other side and leave it for another 3 or 4 hours. But really, this whole process is sort of a 2-day process. You do other things while you do it. All right? All right, so after this has dried completely, after 3-4 hours preferably, if not, if you don't want to just leave it overnight or something, you want to flip it over, and now we're going to glue it from the other side and leave it. Don't worry about glue that gets on the plastic or the glue that's dripped onto the metal. We're going to clean all that up at the end. But there should be a bit of a pit here from where the original pegs broke off. There's like a trench. You just want to get a good healthy amount of glue in there. And then you're going to set it down, and you're going to leave it for another 3 or 4 hours until that dries completely. Okay, the glue on this disc has now dried properly on both sides, and the last thing we're going to do is to clean off the glue residue. So what we're going to start with is the cutting disc again, because I like the wide flat area. We're going to clean up the bottom part of the disc. Again, you're going to want safety goggles in particular here, because what you're grinding off is the dried super glue, which is probably very toxic if you get it in your eyes. So So if you noticed, I'm just very lightly going over the plastic edges, and I just want to prevent any sort of roughness or raisedness from the glue on this back end. On this side, we're going to have to clean up the right angle, which should happen when the peg is at the bottom of this disc, because now of course there is sort of a slope caused by the glue. In this case, you want to be very careful. We want to prevent the peg from vibrating that much, certainly from heating up. So we're just going to get around, and I'm going to use a Dremel head that's like this. Yeah, so it's like sloped outwards, just so that I can really focus in on that slope and just really quickly try to reduce it. So let's attach it to the Dremel. Okay, and that might take a few rounds to get that perfect, but afterwards you just want to take the S-hook and you're going to slide it on. And if you notice that it's hard to push on, what's going to happen is that this S-hook is actually going to break off, the hole in it is going to break off some excess glue as well. But then you're going to have to clean those little glue flakes out of there before you use it afterwards. So you want to push it on tight and try to rotate it. And I can see here, for example, that there's still a crack between the hook and the disc. So I'm going to have to probably sand a bit more in order to get that further down. And I'm also noticing that it's rough to go around. And if I just pull it around a bit, again, it'll help to take off that outer layer of glue. But you want this to be as smooth as it was before you used any glue in the first place. Let me just test this side as well. I'm also going to have to do a bit more at the bottom there. So I'm actually going to swap back over to this so I get the very flat sander. All right, let's try it again. There. Now I get very close. That's worth trying. Close enough. And it's smooth, going around now. See this one? Again, if it feels tight as you're pulling it, it's like actually taking off these flakes, and they're going to get inside here. So you're going to want to use something like, there, see, little glue flakes. You're going to want to like use a thin piece of cloth that's wet and pull all of that out afterwards. Okay, a few notes. So if your holes were too large in the beginning and it was difficult for you to get this at a right angle, then you can now strengthen this area by crushing up some plastic. It should be the same plastic, I think. So you have like your extra pegs, and you can use a Dremel and get shavings, and you can fill this whole bottom area with glue and shavings, and then afterwards sand it perfectly flat. It's important that it's flat. And that will help to strengthen this because it will hold that peg even further in. A second note is after you've made this, when you put it together, if you can't get the mechanism to function correctly, and we have another video where we show the whole process of repairing the Cameleon 3. But if you're having a lot of trouble getting this to work, it can mean that there are imperfections in your disc. So it needs to be flat on the bottom and the top, and it needs to the S-hooks need to fit flush on it, and they need to be able to move. And they can't protrude over this. And if these are too short, it could mean that your S-hook then bends sideways. So what you can do if you're having trouble getting it all to work, take it out, take it apart again, look at your disc and try to fix small imperfections with a Dremel. It can also simply be that you need to take it apart and put it together a few times to get it to work properly. It's a very fiddly system to align properly. In any case, though, this is how we go about making a homemade fix for the Cameleon 3 disc. It's Better just to buy one generally, but one advantage of making it yourself is you do get metal here. So unless you're going to buy the stainless steel discs, this will actually function a lot stronger. Even though it has super glue and so on, it functions a lot stronger than the original disc that has the plastic pegs. But that's that. Hope you have good luck at home if you're trying this. We hope this video has been helpful. If it has been, we ask you to subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.